Wow. So, hey everybody, it's Tad Hargrave from Marketing for Hippies, and I am here to discuss niche marketing with a new colleague of mine from Firepole Marketing, Danny. Thanks for joining us.
That's me. Hi, everyone.
And maybe if you just want to just say a little bit about Firepole Marketing, what got you started, what it is, and yeah.
Sure. So Firepole Marketing is a blog about marketing. We're all about connect, engage, and inspire. We teach people who are on a mission to do something awesome, something amazing for themselves, for their families, for the world, how to connect with other people who would be interested in what it is that they're doing. I've been an entrepreneur for, I like to say, longer than my adult life. I quit school when I was 15 to start my first business.
Nice.
And after bouncing through a whole bunch of different businesses and startups and stuff like that, I started Firepole Marketing. That was 2.5 years ago, and here we are.
And you've developed quite the following. Just to give some context for people, can you say a bit about your reach, your following, how business has been?
Business has been really good. Like, we've grown very, very quickly. I don't teach, I don't advocate get rich quick. If you want to get results, then you've got to put in the time, you've got to do the work, you've got to lay the foundation. And I tell people 2011, we started out pretty much January 2011. That whole year, I hardly made any money at all with Firepole Marketing. I really worked like crazy building relationships and, building awareness and all that. Then 2012, we grossed over $250,000. And this year, we're probably going to do something like 800,000. It's me plus 8 people now on the team.
Wow.
So you really can grow very quickly. This is what we teach people how to do if you put in the time and do the work to build the foundation and connect with people for real.
Right. And so, yeah, building the foundation is a lot of what I want to talk about with you, because I know over the years doing the marketing workshops all around, the topic that kept being the sticking point I saw for people, and it's why I created the Niching for Hippies program, was I just saw that this is where it all got stuck, and people get fuzzy about, well, where do I find people? I'm not sure what to offer. How do I word it? And I'd be like, well, who's it for? It would finally come down to. Then it became clear that there wasn't any clarity, and so it's such an important thing. And I'd asked you sort of before the call. I said, what do you feel like is missing in this conversation around niche marketing? And what do you think other people may not be seeing that could help? And you'd said two things. You'd said one is that it isn't forever. Just because you choose something now doesn't mean you're going to be limited to it for the rest of your life. And you'd mentioned some things about the halo effect, and that how other people's idea over time of what you are an expert at will naturally expand, and that you can then grow into more things. So that the niche is sort of where you're starting, even if it's not where you end up forever. I'm just wondering if you can say more about that, the halo effect, the way that reputation grows.
So I'll say what that is, and then I'll illustrate with my story of how I kind of stumbled into this and did it wrong at first, which hopefully everyone watching this does not have to do. You don't have to get wrong before you get right.
Right.
That is the benefit of my mistakes. So the halo effect is a psychological and cognitive bias. It's just built into the way that all of our brains are wired. And it basically means that if I think you're an expert about one thing, and I hear you talking about something else that's related to that, I will trust that you're an expert about that too. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You don't have to do anything for this to happen. This is just the way our brains are wired. Now, the big but is that I have to think you're an expert about the first thing first. Right? That is your niche. That is where you start. And so people are so afraid of, I don't want to choose a niche because there's all this other stuff that I can do and all these ways that I can serve people. I don't want to leave all that. And you're not leaving it off the table, because once they see you as an expert in one thing, expanding to more is easy. And you see this with, look at anyone who's become big and successful. Look at even big company, right? Amazon sells everything under the sun.
Right.
Back in the day, they were the online bookstore, period. Very simple. Right? Facebook is the social network for almost the whole planet. Back in the day when they started, it was a social network for students at Harvard University.
Right.
So you start very narrow and very specific. That doesn't limit your options. That's what allows you to then grow and expand. And so I'll share my story of how I kind of stumbled into this. The shoemaker is barefoot, right? It's so much easier to see this and advise this for other people and to do it for yourself. But Firepole Marketing back in the day, and when is this going to go live, this interview?
in the next couple weeks.
So-
Maybe it might be this week, but it might be next week.
Okay, so everyone who's watching this, go over to firepolemarketing.com. This is not like a plug. You don't have to subscribe to anything, but just look around the site and hear what I'm telling you. I'm telling you that Firepole Marketing is about engagement. It's about relationships. It's about connection. It's about inspiration. And tell me if the look of Firepole Marketing is really consistent with that. And it's not. I know that it's not. And that's why I asked when this is going live. We're in the process of this like massive redesign of everything we're doing to bring it up to speed with the brand and the relationship we've developed with people, and that will go live in October. So go right now. That'll be your before picture.
Cool. This is September 3rd, 2013. Just for the context, people are watching this later.
Yeah, so you're gonna have like if you move quickly, you've got like a month for the before picture, right?
That's funny.
So Firepole Marketing, and right now the tagline on the site, marketing that works. You know, it's true. I mean, our stuff does work. We are good at it. But it's generic as all hell. And this is where I started out because I had so much to offer and so much to teach, and et cetera, et cetera. And very hard to get attention. And one of the things that I did early on to just get my name out there is a lot of guest posting. And, you know, hindsight...
Can you say what you mean by guest posting?
Oh, sure. So, you know, if I've got a tiny little blog that nobody reads, and you've got like a gymongous blog that a bazillion people read, then if I write a guest post on your blog instead of putting it on my blog, a lot more people will read it. Some of them will click through and come to me, and, you know, we'll all live together happily ever after, optimistically speaking. So hindsight can make you look like a genius, right? I can paint the picture of how I brilliantly came up with this guest posting strategy. I did not. Right? And I'm pretty transparent about that. I was sort of in the right place in the right time. I was taking a course about guest posting from John Morrow, who's a great guy. He's a friend of mine now. And I was working in Myrtle Beach on a client project, putting together like a curriculum for the company that they could use to train their employees. So like, you know, a list of 30-something business books that are really great that they could use. And I get the latest lesson from John in my inbox, and he's explaining, among other things, how a list post, so a blog post that is a long list of resources, is a great way to break into a new blog, or especially a big blog that you're new to for the first time. Because it's a high-value thing, it tends to perform very well, it's a lot of work to put together, so for all those reasons. So I hit reply, and I say, John, I just put together this great list. What do you think? Would Copyblogger be interested? Look, I can't make any promises, but write it up, we'll see what we can do. So I wrote it up, I sent him the draft, he liked it, he gave it to Sonia at Copyblogger, she liked it, they ran it. My first ever guest post, January 10th, 2011, on Copyblogger. It did very, very well. Hundreds and hundreds of comments, thousands of whatever the social metrics were, I don't remember. And a whole bunch of people came back to my site. And I got this big spike in traffic because nobody knew about my site at the time. I was like, cool. And something else really cool came out of this guest post. One of those 38 books that I published, that I listed in that blog post, was The Art of the Start by Guy Kawasaki, about entrepreneurship. And a few days later, after it goes live, I get an email from Guy Kawasaki being like, thank you for mentioning my... And I'm like, holy crap, I'm getting an email from Guy Kawasaki. How awesome is that? And he says, I've actually got a new book coming out soon called Enchantment. How would you like me to send you a copy? Maybe you could review it or something. It's like, hell yeah. Wow. Send me the book. And so he sent me the book. I did a review. We did a podcast together. He even ended up contributing to my book, Engagement from Scratch, I published later that year. And it all came out of this one blog post. And I was like, that's a pretty good story. So I emailed ProBlogger. I'm like, are you interested in this story? They say, yes. I wrote it. They ran it. And again, you know, spike of traffic back to my site. Yeah. This is the point where it clicked for me, this guest posting thing, it's working. There's something there. And so I was like, okay, I got to do more of this. I mean, when I see that something's working, I throw like everything into it. A work ethic I don't lack. So I reached out, I made a list of all the biggest blogs I could think of that I wanted to write for. And I reached out to all of them saying, can I please write for you? Here's a guest post that I think your audience would really appreciate. And I reached out to so many of them because I figured it would be like a numbers game. Right? I figured most of them would ignore me, most of them would say no. But to my great surprise, they were all like, yeah, sure, send me a draft. And I'm thinking like, awesome. And then I'm like, oh crap, I have to write like a dozen posts in like 3 days now.
So funny.
But so I did it. Somehow I got it all done. The blog posts all went live at the same time. And I noticed this cumulative effect of suddenly I'm everywhere. and everyone notices. And I was like, hey, this works. And then I did it like 6 more times that year.
Yeah.
Like I didn't, premeditate, mastermind this project, this strategy. I kind of stumbled into it, saw it work, and then I was doing more of it. And I'm telling this whole story. This is a tactic. It's a great way of getting in front of people and connecting with people. But I was just starting out. Firepole marketing that works, all completely generic, and I was doing all this guest posting. And people started to notice. And this guy starts to leave comments on my guest post saying, wow, Danny, it's like you're Freddy Krueger. Wherever I turn, you're there. And the name stuck. I became the Freddy Krueger of blogging. Now, Firepole marketing that works, generic as all hell. The Freddy Krueger of blogging, ultra specific, everyone remembers it. And there was I call it the niche superhero, the one thing that you're like the absolute expert on that everyone remembers you for.
Huh.
And I stumbled into mine, right? You can be smarter and actually make a plan for what is the thing people are going to remember me for.
Right.
And since, Freddy Krueger of blogging became my published engagement from scratch, these days, I'm kind of recognized as an expert in online marketing and engagement and audience building, to the point that the halo effect is extended beyond the realm of what makes sense, right? People think I'm they reach out to me like I'm an expert in social media, and I'm like, I don't even know what Pinterest looks like.
Interesting.
So,
yeah.
I'm not. I have a friend of mine, Clay Collins. He told me once, he's like, the higher people think your expertise is, the more they come to you for all kinds of stuff. I'm a marketing expert, and people come with their relationship problems. This is not my expertise. How can I help you? But no, you've got insight. You've helped me with things before. I like the way you think. It's the halo effect is a really powerful thing if you start with that first thing that you're the expert on.
Wow, I love that. That's a whole new insight for me. That I remember a friend of mine did a lot of magic for corporations, a lot of corporate shows, and they would keep calling him. They'd be like, "Hey, there's this hypnotist, there's this juggler. What do you think?" And he's like, I'm a magician. I don't. But they really extended it to just corporate entertainment in general.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the second thing you were saying that I guess is kind of connected in terms of what's missing is just knowing that the niche is the hook. It's not the meat. It's the niche isn't about limiting the services you can offer. It's about being memorable for what people will come to you for, so that when people think about niching, it's important to focus on it as an entry point offer that are going to bring people to you, and you can always sell them other stuff later. And I'm just wondering if you can expand on that sort of notion.
Yeah. So, I never wanted to be, my career was not to be the Freddy Krueger of blogging. Right? I had broader ambitions than that. That's so super narrow, so super niche. And not to say there isn't opportunity there, right? In 2012, we sold $100 and whatever $1,000 worth of training on how to write quickly, just the way people ask me, how do I do it? So there's a lot of opportunity in these narrow niches, but that was not, it was neither the full scope of what I wanted to do ever over time. I wanted to do a lot more. It wasn't even the full scope of what I did for people then. It was the first thing that people heard about me for and got to know me for. So, if you want to do 3 things, 5 things, 10 things, first of all, pare down, because, there are only so many hours in the day. It's better to do 2 things right than 10 things not very well.
Yeah.
But start with what is the one that is going to kind of get people's ears to perk up and be, well, I guess if they were dogs, their ears would perk. What would get them to be like, yeah, I want to hear more about this, right? I'm interested, tell me more. After you've talked to someone for an hour and a half and they're impressed with what you do, it's not hard to pivot to a whole bunch of things as long as they're related.
Yeah.
But if they're like, what do you do? And it's well, let me pull out my list and I don't have time for this.
Yeah. And one of the other questions I'd asked before was, what do you think is most important in niching, and what's a distraction? And you'd said how the thing that was most important in niching was really taking the time to do your positioning, to see how you're going to be memorable and different from the competition, and that because just that being unique alone doesn't necessarily mean anything unless it's in a way that matters and is memorable to your customers, and that you're feeling that too many people really gloss over that step and then nothing works because of it. So I'm curious if you could say more about that, and just how does that like where does that fit in the process of figuring out your niche?
So you want to figure out your niche. You want to figure out your angle. What is the thing they're going to remember me for? And you've got to recognize that you do not exist in a vacuum, right? You're not going to meet someone and they're going to be like, oh, I had no idea that I need or have an interest of the kind of thing that you... I mean, I hope not, right? Because then that's an impossible sale to make. So they probably know they have a problem, and they have a perceived sense of what the landscape looks like in terms of who is out there providing or able to provide some kind of solution.
Right.
And that can be a broad solution. I mean, the classic example is that, like, if you're like a carpenter, your biggest competitor is not another carpenter, it's IKEA.
Huh.
Right? It's like that.
Right.
It's not about who sells what I sell. It's from the perspective of the customer, what are the other ways that they might get their problem solved or get their needed delight met or created.
Right. So for a holistic practitioner, it might not just be other holistic practitioners. It might be the whole mainstream medical industry, or...
For example.
Yeah.
It's like, what is the problem that you're solving, or why are people coming to you? And it's like, if they couldn't find you, where would they go? And it's not necessarily someone else like you.
That's a great question to ask.
And people skip over it because they're so absorbed in... I mean, understandably, like, your work is your life, but it's not the life of your customer in most cases.
Yeah.
And so once you've got your list of all the different substantial players, and substantial is important because if they're, if you're running this little niche, tiny practice that, people are just, you're trying to get the word out about it, the fact there are another 1,000 people doing the same thing that nobody's ever heard of them. They're not relevant to this discussion. None of your customers are thinking, well, I can go to you or those 3 other people that I've never heard of. Right? They're thinking, well, I can go to you, or I can turn to Oprah for advice, or Dr. Phil, or whatever.
Right.
So look at who are the players, who are the sources of information, the source of solution, what are the categories of these people, and be like, how is your target customer, the person you want to reach, your target audience, how are they going to differentiate between this landscape? And what you're going to find is that it's going to be on a series of spectrums. Right, and that can range through any number of things. Right, I can give some examples that I thought of when I looked at originally positioning my business. These are relevant to my business, right? They're different spectrums for different businesses.
Yeah.
But so I looked at, well, if you look at all the competitors, all the different solutions out there that teach people how to do marketing, well, some really target people who are brand new to the world of marketing. Mm-hmm. Some target people who are much more experienced.
Interesting.
So totally. A spectrum is the expertise of the target audience.
Yeah.
Another one that is similar but different is the spectrum of amateur versus professional.
Totally.
So a professional marketer is someone who is trained in marketing, and marketing is their job. Whereas an amateur marketer is not trained in marketing. Marketing is not their job, but they still have to do it. And most small business owners, most entrepreneurs are amateur marketers, right? And neither is better than the other, but some competitors in the landscape are much better suited to one versus the other. And you can go through like a whole bunch. There are a lot of different spectrums. So you make this list of all these possible spectrums. You look for which are the 2 that feel to me like they would be most important and relevant to the customer, not to me. Not which are the 2 that make me look best, because people may not care. Yeah. Which are the 2 that like seem most important to the customer. And you take a grid, like a square piece of paper, a 2x2 grid, and take these spectrums and line these up on the edges of the grid, the X and the Y axis.
Yeah.
So you've got like a landscape, an actual landscape of your marketplace. Take your competitors and plot them all over that.
Wow, that's genius.
And anyone can look it up. Like just Google positioning matrix, right? That's what it is. But if you're positioning yourself right where there's already a concentration of all these competitors that are better known and everyone's heard of, that's tough. You either want to change the positioning, or look at a different set of 2 important spectrums, important to the customer, that rearrange the landscape in a way that's more favorable to you.
I love it. Can we pause just 1 second?
Sure.
1 second. Sorry, I had a cell phone that was buzzing, driving me insane.
I didn't hear it at all.
Sorry?
I didn't hear it at all.
Oh, that's good. So I love that idea of the positioning matrix and really looking at, and to me where that resonates is, so I don't know if you knew this, the word niche comes from the French verb nicher, which means to make a nest.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, that idea.
I live in Montreal. People speak French here. So.
Oh, I didn't know you were in Montreal.
Yeah.
Awesome. So this idea of like our nest, like finding our place in the world and where we fit, and so I look at niche and go like, yeah, what's your place in the world, but also just in the marketplace, and it's something that I really haven't done or haven't worked with clients on, but it makes so much sense to really look at the whole marketplace and where do you fit in this community? What is your particular place? Because there isn't any better or worse place. It's like some people go bargain basement prices, some people go real boutique, like high end. It's not like either one of those are better positions to have. They're just going to be different business models. Or if you're working with people who are like I can imagine a spiritual counselor, like there are people just beginning their spiritual path, and then there are people who've like been on it for 20 years, and they both need help, and you might be able to help, but it's like, who do you feel most drawn to? Where do you feel your expertise naturally lends itself?
Yeah, and the spectrums that someone might look at in that space. So it's how far along their spiritual journey is the person you're targeting. How into it versus skeptical are they? Like, do they want to hear about the spiritual side, but do they need like a scientific rationalization for everything?
Right.
Or are they like just they feel the spirit, they feel the energy, they're totally into it. Where do they? And again, on both sides and all across that spectrum, there are people who need help, and there are people who can be good customers. Totally. But depending on how if there is Deepak Chopra, and it's not my market, so I don't actually know who all the players would be.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be like the poor man's Deepak Chopra.
Totally. Well, and what I love about it too is once you've made that matrix and you really see who all the players are and the different roles that everyone is playing in the community, then so many collaborations become possible. Because and somebody will come to you and say, I'm really looking for this, and you say, oh, I don't do this, but I totally know somebody would be a perfect fit.
Bingo.
And you could just do that out of the generosity of your heart. You can set up business relationships. There's so many ways to do it. I'd also been curious about some examples of your favorite niches, and you've given some interesting mainstream ones, which I think are good to look at because it's things that we're all familiar with, businesses we've all seen. And you were talking about Apple and Amazon, and I'm wondering if you could, because you touched on it a bit before, but I'm just curious if there's anything else you wanted to say about that.
Well, sure. I like these examples because they're not at all the examples that people think of. When you hear niche, you think, and my audience is primarily American, so even though my instinct is to say niche, it's become niche. But like, you hear that, you think super narrow, you think super tiny, right? A niche business is like the little mom and pop shop that does something totally random and out there in the little corner store in your neighborhood. It's not this giant, billion-dollar conglomerate.
Right.
Right? You don't think that. But the fact is that Amazon is super, when they started out especially, they were super narrow, super specific, and every single step of the way, they leveraged the halo effect. Right? From books to things that were very much like books, to things that were less like books, but at this point they have an expertise in just selling stuff online and the buying experience, and they never really made a leap that was too far out there, right? And you can see how from one tiny thing in little steps, you can go very far in a lot of little steps. And I mean, Apple is a great example, again, in that they're starting to like be a little bit all over the place. But what made Apple so successful when Steve Jobs came back after his like exile is that he was like, well, we've got like all these different computers, all this different stuff. It's like, no, one computer, one laptop, 5 colors, and it's unique because it's the only computer that comes in colors. Super narrow, super specific. So it was the only brand of computer that you could describe why it's different in a sentence. Right? Super narrow, super specific. And I mean, the best examples of these actually are the really big brands that everyone thinks of.
So interesting.
Right? Axe is, not everyone likes Axe. Not everyone likes what they stand for.
Sure.
But it has a very clearly visible and identifiable place in the market. It's very clearly for some people, very clearly not for anyone else. Right? Walt Disney with the movies that they've put out, right? It's like a different class, a different category
Yeah.
of all the other films that are made, even kids' movies.
That's so interesting. And one here's a nerdy marketing question, just like as a marketing colleague. So Al Reese and Jack Trout wrote the book Positioning, and Al Reese followed that up with the book Focus. And they were both really big, sort of coming out against the idea of what they called line extensions. So, you have like ragu, thick and chunky sauce, and then they came up with the light sauce, and then they came up with the Italian, and all these different slight variations on it. And they were kind of down on that. They were like, that's not a good thing to do, and it hurts profitability long term. Like you have Coke, and then New Coke, and Cherry Coke, and Diet Coke, and his feeling was that hurt profitability. And I'm just curious what your take on that is.
I think it depends a lot on how you do it. Right? Because, and actually, Apple's a great example of this. Like, compare Apple of the late 80s or the early 90s with Apple of, post Steve Jobs' exile and return. The first time, they did all those line extensions, a million different computers, a million different kinds of things, and they just diluted their focus completely.
Yeah.
Right? And destroyed the company. Steve Jobs came back. They do a lot more now than they did when he came back, right? They have desktops, they have laptops, they have the iPod, they have the iPad, they have iTunes, they have a much broader, the iPhone, right? They're in the telephone business, a huge leap. But they kept stepping just one step out in a way that did not dilute the focus of what they're specialized and expert at. And that's really what it comes down to. Like, with ragu, if they're expanding to new flavors of tomato sauce, but they're all excellent tomato sauces, it's all consistent with that promise, then it's all good. But if they're like, let's take that, let's expand to other kinds of sauces and other kinds of foods and other kinds of, it's like, where's the focus? You've genericized completely. There's a great book that is coming out really soon, like in a week from today, September 10th. It's called Thinking in New Boxes. And it's two authors. One of them is my cousin, who is like the senior genius of the Boston Consulting Group for like creativity and innovation and stuff. And one of the examples that they use there is the example of Bic, right? They make the little plastic disposable pens. And their big reimagining of thinking in a different box is that they looked at the landscape. It wasn't like, okay, what can we do in pens? It's like, what is our focus? Maybe our focus is not pens. Maybe our focus is making small, simple, cheap, disposable things made out of plastic, right? And so they expanded into lighters and they expanded into razors, but like it's very focused. It worked very well for them. It wasn't just like, let's expand into like all kinds of random crap, and then it's like this company is nothing special.
Let's focus on things that destroy the planet. I would also been I'd asked you about how do you think you would know if a niche is effective, and you'd said if people remember you for it and they talk about you, in that context, and that sometimes it can be engineered, which is maybe a little bit better, or sometimes you stumble into it like your Freddy Krueger thing, but it has to be memorable. And I'm wondering if there's any other examples you can think of, or just anything else you want to say on that, because I think that's such a great way to I talk about this idea of platform, which feels connected to the niche, but is this question of like, what are you known for, and what do people remember you for, and that even years down the road they're like, oh yeah, I met that person who did this thing. I'm just curious if there's anything else you want to say about that.
Well, there's two sides to it, right? Part of it is kind of finding what is that sweet spot of a topic that gets people's eyes to light up and they remember it.
Right.
And once you find it, what is a label that you can give it that people are going to remember? Right? Like, I connected recently with a guy who makes tons of introductions to people, and he knows a lot of people. And he has earned this nickname of being the joint venture Jedi.
Cool.
And he did not make up that name. Someone gave it to him, right? And you can engineer that, or you can kind of hear it. I mean, I didn't make up the Freddy Krueger of blogging, but I heard it and I ran with it.
I had a similar thing with the marketing for hippies, where it happened where people would... My business was originally called Radical Business. TadHargrave.com was the website. And I also got to a point where your website is great. My website was... I just really hated it by the end. But I.
You'll see the new one when it comes out in October.
Well,
it's
I'm
like
stoked because I like
it. It's gonna change the world. But like,
but yeah, people would say like, "What do you do?" And I'd joke. I'd say, "Oh, I do marketing for hippies." And people would always like be like, "Oh,
like
but
it sticks." Bam, got it. I knew it. I know what that is, and it's like, and I need that.
Yeah.
And if I don't need that, I know exactly which 3 people that I know I have to introduce you to.
Totally. So, and it was, but it took years of saying that and seeing that reaction. And then I was like, but it was after years, and I went online. I was like, "Oh God, is that URL available?" And it was, and somehow I was shocked, like as if that would have been a hot commodity URL.
I would have thought too, but like that's why as soon as you have an idea, I mean, check if the name's available.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, there's something important there in what you just said. That like, I mean, the Freddy Krueger of blogging, the joint venture Jedi. These are like, there's a lot. It's not a hypey thing, but it's like it's a sensationalized kind of label.
Yeah.
And people think that that's what they need. And that is what I happen to stumble onto. That is actually not my personality at all. Right? Marketing for hippies is not sensationalistic in that way, but it still sticks. It's still remembered. I mean, the online bookstore, right? That is not sensationalistic at all. It's not like you're, the online library of. It's not like that, right? It's the online bookstore, but it's straight to the point. And people remember it.
Well, I wrote a blog post a while ago because I noticed that some of my favorite business names were oxymorons, were combining two seemingly conflicting things. So that wouldn't normally go to like joint venture and Jedi. To me, is a little bit like that. Freddy Krueger marketing is definitely like what, but like chocolateforbreakfast.com, zenbitchslap.com. BuddhistBootcamp.com. These things. It's just like people usually laugh, but it also seemed to combine two things, and it made just people say, "Oh, well, how do you?" But also very memorable because they don't seem to go together. So I'm curious, what do you feel like in terms of people finding their niche? Because that is where people struggle. And you were saying there's sort of this trade-off between a sort of simple and effective, and that the best thing you can think of is that the positioning matrix and. But you'd also talk about this idea of the customer profiling 101, sort of before that.
Yeah, so I mean, you can't do... The positioning matrix is a great tool. You can't use it without knowing who your customer is.
Right.
If you don't know who your customer is, then, what do they perceive as relevant differentiation between this or that competitor? I don't know. It's different for different people. Right? So you've got to know who your customer is. I mean, Google customer profile. It's like, anyone who's listening to this can find it easily. There's like a ton of stuff on how to do a customer profile. It's just very clearly describe who the customer is. Do the positioning matrix the way I described, and again, you can Google positioning matrix. Right. But then you can't come up with all this. It's not all just theory. You can't just sit at your desk and at your computer and plan and strategize, and the better the diagram, the more effective it's going to be. It's like, no, make your cool diagrams and have an idea, but then start talking to people. Yeah. Right, and there is no substitute for seeing how people's faces look when they hear it. And I mean, sometimes it's not practical. If you're online, then participate in conversations, but places where people have a chance to respond, where you can see and read and try to get a measure on, what are people connecting with.
One of my colleagues, Dominic Canterbury out of Seattle, he talked about he wanted the hell yeah response. Like if he would have their clients, his clients write it up in like a page, kind of what they're doing, what their proposition was, and he'd meet with his client and somebody who represented the target market. They show him the piece of paper and they just watch him read it. But if the response was like, "That is really neat. Wow, that's so interesting. That's cool, guys." It was just like, meh. He wanted a response like, "Oh my God, hell yes. What? Where do I? How do you know?" There had to be that kind of urgency and the enthusiasm about it. Of course, they're picking somebody who fits in that customer profile.
Of course.
Yeah, that feels so true. And I think a lot of people most entrepreneurs try to go it alone in general, or solopreneurs, especially.
Well, by definition, right?
Sorry?
By definition, right. Solopreneur.
But it often hurts them. They never have those conversations of like, which is wild because those people could even help them design the product. It's like, what do you need? What do you want? How do you want it? What time of day? And they'll tell you everything. And then, like, I used to I've done that in a number of different occasions, and they've just told me what they wanted, so I put it together for them, and then they bought it, and it was like, this is so easy, you know.
Well, I tell people all the time. I mean, the easiest, most profitable offer I ever made, my Write Like Freddy training program. Well, at least until I started selling what I sell now. But
Yeah.
in 2012, I launched this training program, and it's 4 lessons, one lesson per week for 4 weeks, super simple, and almost 1,000 students in a year. We made multiple 6 figures
Wow.
on the back end of all that. And how did I come up with the idea? Well, 1 million people emailed me and they were like, "Can you teach me how to write the way you do?" And I was not smart enough to pick up on it after the first 10 or 20 emails.
I know, right?
It took way later until I got it. But they asked me for it, so I was like, "Well, okay, here. I did it. Do you want it?" And they're like, "Yes." So listen to the customer; they'll tell you.
Yeah. And they may already be telling you. They may have been telling you for years. That's awesome, dude. Thank you so much for making the time. I know it's a busy time for you.
Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
This is really fun. So yeah, if you want to check it out, firepolemarketing.com. Super great, interesting stuff. Very practical, very nuts and bolts from what I saw from checking it out, and brilliant, obviously, as you've been hearing in this interview. So go check that out, and if you want to check the Niching for Hippies course, nichingforhippies.com. And thanks so much. We'll talk to you again.
Thank you.